Multifamily investing is not a solo sport, yet too many investors try to do it all on their own, analyzing deals, raising capital, managing properties until they're overwhelmed and stuck. The truth, without the right team, deals fall through, operations suffer, and growth stalls. At Faris Capital Partners, we've built a powerhouse team that moves fast, executes efficiently, and scales strategically. Today, we're breaking down the key roles you need, how to find A players, and how to structure your team for long-term success. Now, if you're serious about growing your multifamily portfolio and not gaining traction, doing it all alone, go to fulloutinvesting.com and download our 10-step full out investing process video. And there's also a sample deal in there as well to gain a better understanding in how partnering with us can help you accomplish your goals faster and help to win faster as well. Again, go to fulloutinvesting.com. John, it's great to be here with you.
So good to be here, Mark. Love talking about team building and leadership. So it's an exciting topic today, but for the investor listening to this, do not miss going to fulloutinvesting.com. Our video that we put together will give you all the insights you need to make a smart decision. And, Mark, you and I talked a lot about, really what true wealth means, right? And when you have wealth, what does that really look like? And for everybody, that number could be different. But to me, wealth is when your passive income exceeds your monthly spending, right? And so you may still have a great job that's producing income, but when you have income coming in from passively from your investments and it covers your needs, man, that is what freedom looks like. That's true freedom, right? Because now you have freedom of movement. You can make a decision to change a career or whatever. And freedom is one of these things that's talked about a lot, but to me, that's true freedom. When nobody can tell you what to do because you have the income coming in that covers all your expenses. And so, no better way to do that than real estate in my mind. So excited for today's topic, but just do not miss that opportunity to go to fulloutinvesting.com to learn more.
Yeah, it's a really good point, John. The market being up in Canada and Ontario, I didn't think that cash flow or passive income was a real thing because pricing grew so much that you couldn't find deals that cash flowed unless you went way, 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 way up north. And so you'd get cash flow, but you didn't have the appreciation. And so these multifamily, large 100-unit apartment buildings that we're buying into in high growth markets like Atlanta, like Charleston, South Carolina, like Tampa, Florida, these deals cash flow and they produce passive income. Not only do they produce passive income, but they also have high upside opportunity as well, high growth. And so, people ask, what do you like better? Do you like cash flow, passive income, or do you like growth, appreciation? And I said, well, I want both. And they're like, well, and what about the downside? I'm like, hey, listen, that's a third part. That's a third pillar, three-pronged to a stool here is that I want low downside, right? I want the downside protected. I want upside. I want appreciation. I like having that appreciation. I like when the market goes up 10%. My equity went up, it will say 40% because, we're leveraging these properties. And I also like cash flow as well. And so these deals, they give us all three. And so just fulloutinvesting.com, go check it out if you are listening to the show. And that sample deal deck, we've been getting asked a lot about, okay, well, show me a typical deal so that when your next deal comes, I have an understanding of what I'm going to see. And there was a 50-minute presentation in there that I recorded. I got everything crammed into that video so you can actually speed it up to 1.5 so you can get through it a lot quicker. But that's going to give you a really good understanding of our whole process from start to finish. And you're going to get to see a sample deal by going to fulloutinvesting.com.
That's right. And, great segue, right? Because when you talk about the downside risk, I would say there's really two things. Number one is the market, right? You got to be thoughtful about the market you invest in, because at the end of the day, what we're investing in is where people lay their head at the end of a day, right? And so it's one of those core human needs, right? And the Maslow hierarchy of needs, shelter is at the top, right? And so that demand will never go away. So if you get the market right, that helps reduce your risk greatly. But the second factor, and what we're going to talk about today, it's the operator themselves, the team, because really what's happening here is when you buy an apartment building, what you're actually buying is a business. And so one person, right, it would be the idea of like one person trying to run a business that generates $4 or $5 million in revenue, right? At the end of the day, it's going to have problems if it's one or two people, right? You need a power team that's there looking after and minding all those details. And so, we're buying businesses here. So that's how we operate them like a business. So those are the two ways in my mind you reduce your risk, is picking the right market and then picking the right operator that has the right team in place that can ensure all those details get taken care of, right? So that's what we're here to talk about today. What does that power team look like?
Yeah, for sure. And when you're buying a property, a single family property, you can get away with running it on your own. But when you're running these large multifamily deals, you really need a team to take it down. There's too much, we'll say there's too many tasks that need to be done within a short time frame. And there's so much expertise that you need to ensure that you get right. Because if you get something wrong on these larger multifamily deals, we're not talking about, 10, $20,000 where you can come out of pocket and pay for it. We're talking about millions and millions of dollars. And so for me, when we really started digging into the behind the scenes and how these deals are taken down, it became clear that, what, we need to recruit and build a team to be able to pull everything together. But then the key is not only to find key players, but then how do you pull them together in an infrastructure to get them to work together so that you're moving in one direction? Because you get a bunch of A players together, but if you don't have somebody there to pull them all together and to set the vision of where they're going and to build a culture around them, then they're like racehorses that they want to run. And so they need infrastructure and they need clarity on where we're going to, in order to get the most out of them and to be able to get the best result for the overall, the investors in the business that we're in. And so that became really important for us as we started building the team out.
Yeah, I think about, literally day one, our first, sort of official day as a company, we sat in a room and we articulated that vision, right? And we nailed down the mission, our values, our brand promises. In other words, what are we going to deliver to our investors? And like, what are the non-negotiables, our three golden rules, a lot of the things we've even already talked about on this podcast. But I think back, I mean, we bought our asset manager on before we even had a deal, right? Because we knew when we had the deal, we needed the asset manager, and sort of get her in, integrated into the culture. We had tasks and things she could be working on, of course, because we didn't want to hire somebody just to sit on the sidelines. But, we built that team out. And fortunately, both you and I have found success in our prior businesses. Now you still have Faris team. I exited my prior business, but, just that idea of, we were fortunate in that we could make that investment, but we knew that investment would pay massive dividends, when we found that first deal. And now we're working on our fifth, right? And so having that team in place, man, it just gave us the edge and it allowed us to run faster. So
For
yeah.
For sure. So we're going to go through step by step and how we've grown the team to date, and I think that's going to give some really good context. So the very first thing we did. So I'm a big follower of Jim Collins. John, I know you and I talk
Yes.
a lot about that, and one of his key concepts is to fire a bullet before firing a cannon. So the very first thing that we did was, myself. I went to our CPA actually for our other business fairs team and said, "Hey, listen, I'm looking to go into a couple deals. We're gonna bring a larger check into those to see how these deals are being run. But our investors that are coming in, we have to look after them and make sure that all the taxes are in line." So I went to our CPA and said, "Hey, listen, let's start, and I'm gonna go after these two deals, but we got to make sure that our investors are looked after." So we actually did that. We went after, there was two different groups, very different asset classes, and we got to see the good, the bad, and the ugly of the type of operators that are out there and how they run the deals, and also the types of deals as well. And so Madison and I, we did that. And then once we got clear what the overall, we'll say, approach was and the type of assets that we like. So we like value add. That's what, spoiler alert, that's the deals that we really like. Most amount of upside, least amount of downside. Then we said, okay, we need to go build the team. So I'm going to go down in steps here, John, because that was the next step, is actually bringing on John, which is the integrator. But that's the next step. The very first with us that was really important to make sure that we nailed down, and if you're looking at scaling a company yourself, is having a visionary to start it. And so the visionary, one of the things that they do is basically, okay, where are we going in, like, what's the BHAG, the big, hairy, audacious goal? Where are we going in 10 years? What are we trying to accomplish? And that BHAG needs to be measurable. And so for us, it's 10,000 residents that we want to be able to look after. So we also want to be able to place $1 billion in equity into these larger multifamily deals. We believe in it that much. And so if we do a billion, we know that about 5,000 investors, well, their lives will be changed by getting, 20% plus annual returns. That's really a strong vision. And also for us, we set this mission statement to go full out for our investors and provide the best investing experience in the world. And so that's very clear. So we have a clear mission, we had a clear vision of where we're going. And John and I, once we brought John on and we partnered up, we sat down and we said, okay, here's the 3-year vision. And so that is really the CEO, the visionary in the company. It's really ultimately their responsibility to get very clear where the company is going. And you really need that so that everybody is clear. Okay, what are we trying to work towards? And A players, they absolutely love that when you can get clear. It's like, hey, listen, we're going to go conquer something. Okay, but we're going to go conquer something that's big, that's huge. And it's like, let's go do this together. And A players, they love a big challenge. If you give them a little weak goal to go after, it's like, yeah, we're looking to increase 10%. Now, I'm not taking anything away from that, but when you're looking to start off with something and you want to track that, like the best of the best, they love when you're like, we're going to change the world. And that's what, Steve Jobs, he was a, really strong visionary. He said, we're going to change the way that people think. Right. And we want to build a company that other people are really proud of. And so he set this strong vision that people wanted to be a part of it. So that was the first step as a visionary. And then the second step there was to bring on a very strong integrator. Now, for context, because we have a successful real estate brokerage that provides cash flow that allows us to actually go and invest in building the infrastructure out, which is very expensive to start hiring and bringing on all these A players that John and I are going to be talking about. The next step that I knew that was really important is to bring on a very strong integrator. And so what was really cool was John and I had been masterminding. I'm really big with masterminding. I had reached out to John about 4 or 5 years prior to this first conversation. I said, hey, John, it was, Mark Spain, that was his prior company. I said, let's start masterminding because we're the top real estate team in Canada. You're the top in America. It only makes sense that we start masterminding. We've been having conversations for years, built like back and forth relationship, gaining ideas from each other. And when this role came up, I'm like, I need a strong integrator to help me pull together and build this team out. I'm like, who's a very strong integrator that I know that can come on? And it was just so happened I've been masterminding with John. I'm like, John, holy smokes. Like,
Yeah.
and so when I approached John, I said, hey, listen, here's what I want to build out. John, maybe you could take it from there and then tell us a little bit about what the skill sets of an integrator are before we get into the other roles.
Yeah. So, to me, an integrator is somebody who can basically, pull all the pieces of the business together and ensure that that vision we already talked about is being executed on. And so what that looks like is creating systems. So everybody knows exactly how we do business. And then it's really clearly defining the responsibilities of each individual team player. So there's no overlap or, duplicative efforts. I think servant leadership is something that's super important for that integrator. They need to have that ability to, build relationships with the team members. So if they're struggling or challenged with something that, we can pull together and create a plan of execution. My brain just sort of works that way. It's interesting. What I've learned about myself is, I don't like to exert any more energy than I have to. It's just something I've come to grips with. And so, in other words, it's not so much shortcuts, but it's like I want to find the simplest solution to the problem, right? And so, Bill Gates even one time famously said, if you want a really difficult problem solved, give it to somebody who's a little bit lazy, because they're going to figure out those like shortcuts. Now, it's not saying I'm lazy, but my brain just wants things to be easy. And so it's not always that way, right? But, sometimes a team member brings me something that feels very big and very complicated for them. And so another factor I would add in is calm under pressure. And so, Mark, you've known me a long time, so you probably have observed that when stressed out or some new information hits, you probably see me get hot for like a minute, but then it usually is like immediately down to, all right, what are we going to do about it? Like, what's the solution here? And so that ability to deal with multiple stressors and still stay calm and find those pathways to solutions. When you look at a business, to me, what it boils down to is constraints, right? What are the constraints of the business? And what are the fires we need to be fighting today, maybe in a month, maybe in 6 months, maybe a year? And so basically that prioritization around those problems, because every department, every person, every business has problems. It's just kind of focusing on, okay, which are the one problem that if we solve today would make everything easier and maybe eliminate some of those other problems, right? So I would say that ability to problem solve, to build systems. So one of the things we do at Faris Capital Partners, I know you've done it, Faris team, and I did at my previous company, is we leverage behavioral assessments. So what my behavioral assessment says is that I'm a demanding, take charge, direct individual, but I also have a perfectionism and a systems orientation as well. So my perfectionism never gets out of control, because once again, I'm a take charge, demanding, let's get it done type of individual, but there's enough detail orientation there that I can get into the weeds and look for those little constraints or challenges within the issue. So I would say in my world, that CEO and that president have to be demanding, take charge, direct, results oriented. The bottom line, at the end of the day, a business is about results. Can we get to those results? Then the secondary factor for that implementer is they have to have the people ability, right? Ability to build relationships with people, and then that system orientation. So if you're listening to this and you have a team and you're not leveraging some form of a behavioral assessment in your management and hiring process, you're probably missing some opportunity here. So those are some of the things that I think, I bring to the table, but a strong implementer needs to bring to the table.
Yeah. So I would say that, John, you're probably one of the strongest that I've seen in recruiting and finding talent. I think that is like such a important part when you're growing a company, finding talent, and then managing and looking at. I'm not even a big fan of that word managing. I like
Yeah.
coaching,
Yeah.
coaching better, and so coaching and giving we'll say a sounding board for your direct supports, and
Mm-hmm.
motivating and encouraging and being there and helping them work through challenges on a day-to-day basis. And
Yeah.
so by you doing that and having all of our direct we'll say senior leaders reporting to you, then that allows, say, myself to continue to have enough space to be able to build the relationships that we need and ensure that from a vision standpoint we're going in the right direction.
Mm.
And ultimately, like, it's my job as the visionary to make sure that we don't run into we'll call it an iceberg. Like, I'm always going up and just making sure longer term we're going in the right direction. And like John, with yourself, it's like the execution of the business plan and making sure that the engine is running and we're actually moving as fast as possible. And so keeping everybody together and in alignment is like that's like a huge strength that you have. So like building, finding talent, and then ensuring that the business plan is being executed on a day-to-day basis. That and one thing I've noticed with you as well is daily, we'll say, activities. Is like you can plow through work a lot, we'll say, in a very streamlined way, and it's like incredible what you can get done. And for me, it's like I'll get it like 50% of the way, and I want to pass it off to you,
Yeah.
and then you're like 100%, I got it, and you're like, phew, take it all the way to the end zone. And it's like you get energy. I'm like, I get energy. I
Yeah.
love starting things and I love getting it off. And if you're listening to this, you might be more of a visionary, like, oh my goodness, that's me too. I love starting things, but then you got to find like a John
Yeah.
part to partner up with, and then John will take it the rest of the way. And John, I know you love it when I give you sort of like, hey, you like, it's not like, oh, you're giving it to me, so I have to do the rest of the
Yeah.
work.
Yeah.
Never.
Yeah.
This is very much like, thank you, Mark. He's like, I got it. And then all of a sudden, John just like, I'm like, holy geez, you got that done. He's like, yeah, I got that. It's like, I'm on to the next thing. I'm right. Okay, cool. I'm going to go over here and conquer this land.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
The last component I would add that I failed to mention too is a strong sort of sense of curiosity. So that could be about life, right? Reading a lot of books, biographies. I love memoirs written by successful entrepreneurs. And one of my favorites is Shoe Dog by Phil Knight. I mean, if you've ever read that book, Mark, I mean, Nike failed for almost like 25 years before they finally figured it out. I mean, it was like such a tale of perseverance and just never willing to quit. But curiosity is a big thing. So sometimes what I find is that when somebody's brought a problem, they never even slow down to analyze the problem itself. They just, bring you the problem. And so one of the things I work on with our team and prior teams is developing the problem solving kind of like ideas. So if you come to me with a problem, I want you to bring one or two, maybe even three potential solutions. But so much of problem solving is just curiosity. It's kind of peeling back the onion, so to speak, and going, well, what created the problem? And in tech, they call it the 5 whys. So it's just, well, why did this happen? Well, why did that happen? Why did this happen? Why did that happen? And you usually at 5 get to the root cause of the issue. And often what you find is you might just have the wrong person. So in our world, that's usually like maybe at the PM level or, something like that. But in my experience, if your business has a problem, you're probably missing a person, and so that talent acquisition component you mentioned, going out and finding the right people, and one of the things that's so interesting about it is we mentioned behavioral assessments. And so I'm a big believer that, people have a core behavioral style that, I think about it like a rubber band at rest. So if your core behavior, how you just like to operate as the rubber band just sitting on the desk, and I can stretch that rubber band pretty dang far, right? So that's where you're putting somebody into a stressful position. But if you pull it too far, what ends up happening, right? It either snaps back and hits me, or it snaps back and hits them, or it breaks, right? And so when you can find people that have the right behavior that matches the role, that's number one. And then number two, ensuring that the person fits in within the culture that's been created within the business. And what's tricky there is that if you look at our team, they all come from vastly different backgrounds and lived experience. So it's not as if we go hire a bunch of people exactly the same. But for us, our values, right, that genuine love of people, making wise choices, first-class service, operational excellence, speed of execution, that's what I'm talking about. So, vast difference amongst the personalities of you will, of the team, but the alignment around those values and then the right behavior in the right role is where the real magic happens. So, it's something where I think in general, business leaders, especially like the integrator at the top that's bringing on the key leadership team, should spend most of their time is finding the right team. If you spend a lot of time there, especially in the front end, everything just becomes easier, right? So that people selection is a huge component there.
Yeah, for sure. And so when you start off, you're all these positions we're going to say you have to start doing them on your own, right?
That's right.
And then, we were just really blessed that we had, other businesses that were able to say, hey, listen, we're going to invest heavily into this business because we believe in it.
Mm.
And the way that the multifamily space works and the syndication space works is we pretty much just make enough through some smaller fees to be able to maintain these deals until we exit. And all of our profit pretty much comes on the back end when we sell the asset, like 5 years down the road. You got to be really sold on this. Like I was all in when I started diving in. I'm like, okay, how do these deals work? Okay, I've been successful in real estate. We've taken down other like smaller deals, but the larger stuff was like, how do we get a competitive advantage? One, that's a big one. Whenever I play into any sort of game, it's like, what's our competitive advantage? Like, I don't want to just be able to break even with everybody else. I want us to be able to do something strategically. And generally it's hard. It's hard to do in order to get a competitive advantage, but I want some sort of like extra edge there that if we do it really well, we're going to be much better than the competition and the assets that are around us. And so there's that. And there's like, okay, what's the upside that we can make impact for investors? Because these deals can't just be a little better. They definitely can't be the same. They have to be a lot better to be able to say, listen, I'm going to take my investment out of this investment. I'm going to actually go invest it over here with Faris Capital Partners. It's got to be a way better. And so I need to have all those in alignment, all those pieces in alignment, and then the ability to say, yeah, we can go build the team. Because that was one of the things that we saw when we were investing in some other deals with other operators is like, if we're going to take this on from start to finish, we got to build the team, and we can't just hire one person in one area. We need to hire experts in all the roles, and we need to be able to have we'll say the cash flow to be able to front end and invest in that until these deals start exiting where we can say, yeah, this is all worth it. And so all that needed to come together. And this business is, one of the very few that I'm like, we have a competitive advantage. John, with your and my background, it just made a lot of sense that, when we're going in compared to say another operator, we have a strategic advantage with our background being in real estate, being
Mm.
successful building real estate teams. So
No, that's right.
yeah. So okay. So we went down a little bit of a rabbit hole there, John. So because you and I, when we start talking about building and scaling businesses, I don't know,
Yeah.
we
It's
both
my
get
favorite thing
excited
to
on
talk
this.
about. Yeah,
We
that's right.
could talk for hours and hours on, the visionary role, the integrator role, and then each of the like org chart design. I don't know. I geek out on that stuff.
You
It's like,
do.
red, yellow, green, right? Who's red, who's yellow, green, strategic, building, growth. And anyway, so the next person, where, John, who's the next person? So we got the visionary, we got the integrator, and then who's the next person in the ladder here that when we're building a real estate investment firm that is really critical that we bring on?
So that analyst, deal sourcing person, right? So who's actually out there hunting down those deals? Now, you said something earlier that I think is worth pausing on. That we don't just go hire these people and have them go figure it out. Like, we intimately understand each of these roles. So I know how to underwrite a deal. You know how to underwrite a deal. At the same time, I'm building relationships with brokers alongside our acquisition specialists. So it's not something we just leave with them. My view is I need to know at least a little bit about every aspect of the business, right? So, for example, we use some software platforms. Like, I'm intimately aware of how to run those software platforms. And what I've learned in the past is that, especially as your business grows and scales, and maybe you go from 9, 10 people to 100 people, you start getting told some stories, right? People are like, oh, that's not possible, we
Yeah.
really can't do that. And I'm like, no, I know Salesforce, I know it's
Yeah.
possible. And I had a guy in my team
Yeah.
at Mark Spain Real Estate, and he was a younger guy, so it was actually kind of like part of our relationship. I'd poke at him a little bit. I'm like, Alexander, if I can Google this and find the answer, man, I'm going to come down and see you, and he'd go, all right, I'll go figure it out. And so without that institutional knowledge, like, you may be taken advantage of. So this is not something we just go hire the person and let them figure it out. We're intimately involved in this process. But at the end of the day, Mark, since January 1st, we've probably been given north of 400 deals to look at. Now, we reject a lot of these just on glance because it's, maybe a value, not a value add. It's an opportunistic deal. It's not in the right market or sub market. But you have to do some work on anything that fits the general buy box. So if it's the right vintage in the right area, there's time that it takes that you have to look at these, and you can't just look at the broker's offering memorandum because they're beautiful and they have a lot of great data, but it's a sales piece, right? So sometimes the rent comps are maybe not true comps, right? So you have to dig in a little bit. And so hiring somebody like on our team, Joe, all day long, all he's doing is talking to brokers and analyzing deals. He's also working with lenders and debt providers just to ensure we have the best type of deal and the structure of the deal that's going to look after our investors and get them the best possible return. So, he's identifying, analyzing these deals. Now, we work together on this, but he's the tip of the spear with the brokers in the negotiations. So what we did was we wanted to find somebody that wasn't just an analyst. We went out and actually took a step ahead, and we hired somebody that has 15 years of experience in deal sourcing. I mean, he's closed over $800 million in commercial real estate as a acquisitions person, right? So he's identified the deals, brought them in, closed them, and then eventually exited
Right.
them.
34% IRR returns on all of his exits as well.
That's
So
right. So
that's
very
huge
strong,
track
like
record. Yeah.
exceptionally strong, right? And so, you can't overstate how important like relationships are enough, right? I mean, at the end of the day, relationships are the driver of life, but particularly when it comes to finding these deals. So, for example, we just made best and final on a deal, and in the feedback from the broker, it was interesting because we weren't in the number one slot. Strategically, we go in a little bit lower, of course, on our first offer. We're not going to put our best foot forward. So, that didn't bother us. But what was interesting is the broker said, well, buyer number two, I don't really know who they are. I've never really dealt with them. and buyer number 4, 5, and 6 never had any experience with them. So the fact that Joe's not only closed deals with these folks, but also just over the years stayed in touch with them, comments on their LinkedIn, congratulates them on a closing. When we go visit them in the office, we bring little, gifts, just those small little things, just to, hey, we appreciate your time today. Here's a Yeti mug or whatever. All these things get remembered, and it's that edge that we provide. So for that, you need that strong person. Now, if you're a smaller group, or maybe you're looking to buy your first deal, it may be appropriate just to start with an analyst, somebody who has the financial
Yeah.
background to underwrite and analyze the deals. Because, I mentioned this earlier, Mark, but even though Joe has these relationships, I'm deeply involved. So when we do broker visits, I'm always there alongside Joe. I reach out to brokers, on my own, and just build relationships, congratulate them, things like that if they had a closing. So it's not just something I leave with Joe, but he has that and brings that in. So for you, if you're newer, maybe an analyst, just somebody who can really underwrite these deals. Because, gosh, Mark, our underwriting model probably, it's like 15 tabs on Excel, and one errant number can change the entire
Yeah.
result. So that
Yeah.
perfectionism, that, this person needs to be analytical, data driven, and relentlessly focused on getting it right, because we haven't had an issue, but you can imagine if somebody just inputs something wrong here in the debt assumption, and then we find out later that the leverage is lower, all of a sudden our returns are fundamentally different. So that detail orientation is critical. In our world, we also need, once again, that relationship component. So Joe's just a good guy. He's very well read. He can talk to anybody about anything. And so that goes a long way. So, whether it's talking about golf, cigars, or, macroeconomic conditions in China, like Joe's got it covered. So he can cover just about anything. So that's a critical factor in our world. This person needs to not only be that data driven person, but they also need to have that
Yeah.
relationship.
Well, and just one last thought before we move on to the next hire is the fact that even if you're going to buy a deal on your own, yeah, I have this quote besides Proverbs. It
Mhm.
goes, plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors, they succeed.
Yeah.
And so even if you don't have an acquisition specialist or an analyst that you're working alongside or partnering with, just like reaching out to one saying, hey, can you take a look at this deal and am I missing anything? Because they could say, hey, did you think about this or did you think about that? And the act of sending to them as well is a very good practice, because you got to get all your stuff together to make sure that it's strong enough where you can pitch it.
Yeah.
And if you know that it's not strong enough for them to be able to pitch it, or you're not putting your stamp on it and you're embarrassed about the analysis that you did, that should say something about how strong or weak you are on the deal. And so
That's
I
right.
think just by sending it to somebody, they're gonna that knows, that does this full time, they'll love to just take a peek at it and they'll give you their unfeathered feedback. And so
Yeah.
that is really good. Just get outside counsel before you pull a trigger on from somebody that has experience doing this. But that one act, just by getting outside counsel, it's so wise. That's what I was just talking with an investor earlier today, and so he's looking to invest over $1 million, and he's like, yeah, I've sent it to my advisor, another advisor that he wants to take a look at. I'm like 100%. I'm like, that is very good. Like, and what I suggest is let's all jump on a call and let's go over any of the questions that they may have, because they might be able to point something. I'd like, did you think about this? And if I don't know the question or the answer to that, that to me, I want to know that. I'm like, I might learn something from what they point out. And
Yeah.
so I think getting outside counsel. Now, what's really important when you do that, just realize that if you're sending it to your financial advisor and it's a real estate investment, just have some context that they're not compensated based on you pulling money away from them and putting it in a real estate deal.
That's
So
exactly right.
keep that in mind. If it's Uncle Joe you're sending it to, their mission is to look really smart, and so they're probably going to be negative. So understand who you're getting it from, and do they have, we'll say, context to be able to give good insight and counsel. I think that's really important, whoever you send it, and that they have experience doing these types of deals, I think is really important. So be selective of who you send it to so you get the best kind of wisdom. Because the last thing you want is, you don't go do the deal and then you realize it was a really good deal. You just didn't pull the trigger because you didn't get good counsel. So, but on the flip side, you want to make sure that you don't send it to somebody that has no experience. They say, yeah, go ahead, it's great. and then you go ahead and then you regret it because you didn't get wise counsel.
That's it. Yeah, wise counsel and making wise choices, as I mentioned earlier, is definitely one of our values. And I think a leader needs to be humble, right? They need to be willing to ask the quote unquote stupid question, right? Because that was such a great example. Maybe on that call you actually get a nugget that or an angle of looking at it that you hadn't seen before. But you're dead on about financial planners. By the way, I love my financial planner. She's incredible. She does a great job. We almost always outperform the market. Big fan. But when I even shared with her what, because we're close. And so I was like, well, I'm, moving from this opportunity. This is what I'm doing next. And it was like, and I'm not making fun. She just had never even heard of this. Like, she didn't even know what it was. And like, I had to explain how it's structured and how it works. And so, a lot of these financial planners that work at these large banks, what do? They trade securities. So they're just taught securities. They're not taught about these alternative investment strategies. And so it's not a negative thing. It's just, you got to make sure. So in that context, like, find somebody who's investing in real estate that's found success in it. Right. And it's that mastermind thing we touched on earlier. If you're a new investor, somebody in your world, probably maybe a family member, or could be like an aunt or uncle or whatever, somebody owns rental property more likely. And so call them up and say, hey, would you be open to reviewing some deals? I'm new to this and I just want to make sure I'm making a smart choice. In my experience, people love to help. If they're asked for help, people love to do it. And so I think that's such great advice, Mark. Make sure that the person you're asking for that counsel understands real estate, right? I think that's a critical component. In our world, the next big role, and I've already mentioned this, but in our trajectory, we started with an analyst. So you brought on Madison, who you already mentioned, that CPA, then me, the integrator, then we brought on an analyst. But the next hire was our asset manager. Now, Mark, you had a big portfolio. You have a big portfolio of assets. So we said, Georgia, when you start, we're going to have you just look at everything Mark has, just do an analysis. Are there anything that he's missing or whatever? And then subsequently, we're looking for a new deal. And so as soon as we found that deal, it was critical to have her eyes on it, because, if you hire the asset manager after you acquire something, right, and then you come to find out that, ooh, your red projections are a little bit aggressive here, right, all of a sudden, so having Georgia there on day one when we started circling deals and we knew we had found a good opportunity, to have her eyes on it, because at the end of the day, her responsibility is executing the business plan. So, having that buy-in at the start. And this goes back to why it's so critical, because, we have an acquisitions person. They're going to look at it maybe a little bit different, just slightly different than Georgia. You and I are going to have different views and ideas and perspectives on the deal. And then we bring Madison and our CPA. So all five of us really have to get comfortable and excited about the deal before we proceed or move forward. And so that strength in numbers just ensures that, because Madison sees things differently than you and I, Georgia sees things differently. And so pulling all that institutional knowledge together, when we go out on an LOI, we want that deal and we're going to win that deal. That's our mindset and that's our approach, because we've done the work. So that asset manager, once again, they're executing the business plan. So they have to ensure that the property performs according to that business plan, right? So, are we hitting our renovation targets? Are we executing our 28-day transformation where we renovate the exterior and the amenities in that first 28 days? They're also the ones responsible for managing the relationship with the property manager. So in our world today, we work with third-party property management. So not only does she source and figure out who we're going to partner with, now I'm a part of those conversations as well. So between the two of us, we select who we're going to work with in that market. And then she's responsible for that day-to-day relationship. So you've got the property manager, but guess what? You also have the maintenance tech, the contractors, the construction manager. So all that's under her purview. And then she's diligently tracking the important KPIs: occupancy, rent collections, expenses, construction management, to ensure that we're not, getting ahead of ourselves or overspending or, not being mindful of expenses. Mark, we analyze deals every day, and I'm shocked sometimes at the things you can find in the financial statement that are just easy to fix that just don't get fixed. And so that's the value of a strong asset manager. So for example, we were looking at a deal recently where the operator signed a deal with Valet Trash like 10 years ago. Valet Trash is, of course, where a company will come out twice a week and collect the trash. The resident moves it out, in front of their door. They come and take it to the dumpster. So it's just a nice value add for our residents. But, what if they just don't show up? In this context, what was happening is they were basically losing money by offering that service to their residents because they just never renegotiated the contract. Well, Our asset manager on an annual basis looks at every contract and renegotiates them, to make sure it's favorable for us and our residents, right? So this person needs to be operationally minded. They need to be strong in problem solving and financial tracking. So somebody who's highly organized and process driven is really important in that role.
Yeah, right on. Next is the investor relations or the capital raise lead. So this is something that I'm doing right now. We do have two inside sales reps that basically they go ahead and they book. They have some preliminary conversations. We do some online lead generation as well. So those preliminary conversations they're having, and then they're going ahead and they're booking with myself. In some cases, John, with yourself as well. Now, this person here needs to be really strong with relationships. And so the relationship building side of it needs to be really important. And to somebody that can actually truly listen to what the problem is of the investor and what the goals of the investors are to ensure that, listen, is this a good potential solution for you? Like, what's the pain you're going through? What's the problem you're going through? Where do you want to be down the road? And, does this fit? Because, like, for example, our deals are in general 3 to 5 years. If you're looking for liquidity, this is not the right investment for you. If you're looking to
Mm-mm.
be able to access your cash right away, this isn't the right investment. So for us, that whoever that is, that investor relations or capital raising lead needs to understand who's going to be the right fit. Because if they get into the deal, the last thing we need is an investor that's just antsy, is worried all the time, is constantly they're asking if they can get their money back. We need to be very clear that this is going to be, you're selecting this opportunity, but we're also selecting if this is going to be the right fit for us, for you to
Mm-hmm.
come on as an investor partner, because all of our investors that come on, they're actual partners. Like, they're limited partner so general partner, limited partner relationship. And so they're partners in the deal. And so that becomes really important, those skill sets of the relationship building and understanding, what the goals and challenges are that the investors are going through to see if it's a good fit.
That's right. It's something that I love that you talked about there is that this isn't for everybody, right? It's not the right choice for everybody. So that empathy that person can bring into the situation to really listen and understand and potentially advise, right? To maybe this is a better approach, or maybe we should come back in 6 months, right? So yeah, it's at the end of the day we want to make sure we're matching the right investor with the right opportunity. That's what it boils down to, and so that's what that team's all about.
For sure. Yep. So next we got there's a few here that currently right now, property management, as John had mentioned, we don't have that in-house. We're soon coming into that potentially. That being said, John, we kind of almost run it like it's in-house, our property manager, because we're so, like, John, you and George actually flew out to Charleston to actually go through the interview process of our property manager that's coming on site and our leasing manager, right? And so that was really important, and most operators would never do that. And so for us, like, we're very, very hands-on with our properties because we have a culture. Fair's Residences, we have a full culture that we implement as soon as we go on, and as soon as we take a building over. And as the key player there is the property manager. And so
Mhm.
for us, we need to stamp them, meet them, and actually hire them ourselves. Otherwise, we're not going to get the right fit. So that property manager is going to be the next hire. And that is third party right now, but that's something that we're very in tune with what's happening there on a day to day. And that process of finding them is something that we didn't take lightly, and so that becomes very important that as you scale, you need a strong property manager.
Yeah, no, that was a lesson we, candidly learned the hard way initially. So on our first deal, there was a great team already in place, and we spent a lot of time with them through due diligence, and we just knew, and we said, okay, this is great, and it all worked out, thankfully. So the team that's there is still the team that's there. They were already in place, but they just kind of came over to our side of the fence and have been doing a great job. But on our Charleston deal, I mean, we caught it quick, but somebody who we thought was there on day one that was working with the prior owner we thought was going to be a great fit, but within like 3 weeks we just started seeing results start to slip. And what we realized is that the person was auditioning for the role, and so they kind of stepped it up and during the under contract period and sort of like checked all the right boxes, but once the deal closed, all of a sudden they took their foot off the gas pedal. So we made a quick change, But what we learned in that is that, at the end of the day, you could go with the best property management company in the world and you love the leaders and the president and you meet all the right people and you're like, man, these folks are fantastic. They got all the software and technology we want. It's great. But if they just make a hiring mistake, our asset's going to suffer. And so we decided on that day going forward that whatever property management team we partner with needs to understand and be comfortable with the fact we're going to go identify the property manager and the leasing manager. We're going to hire them and then deliver them to the property manager. And then they can run their process, right? Because they do background checks and things of that nature. And what we found is our property managers, actually, the company, I should say, really likes that because it takes a little pressure off of them, but we can ensure that we're matching somebody who really honors our culture. And Mark, we are looking at a deal right now, and I'm highly confident we're going to win it. And you can literally see the moment in time 9 months ago when they hired a new property manager. So it wasn't even a new company; it was just a new PM. And in the reviews on Google, they went from almost all 5-star to almost all 1-star, like in a course of a week. And they're calling out the property manager by name. I've never seen anything like it. And candidly, as I thought about it, like we get copied on every resident survey. So it's like, I see when we get a 5-star review, right? Or I see when we get a potentially bad review. Thankfully, we haven't gotten any of those yet, but you see it all. And so if I'm like an operator and I saw one review that mentioned the property manager by name, I'm asking a lot of questions, but if I see 2, I'm like, all right, now we got a pattern, and 3, it's like, you're probably out the door. Just bottom line, because, look, problems come up, but it's how you solve them. And we've turned what could have been a 1-star review into a 5-star review because we hired the right person. So for example, we had a woman who had some drywall issues on her ceiling in her kitchen because the upstairs unit sink overflowed, and she felt like she couldn't use her kitchen. And so some operators will say, well, your kitchen's still totally usable. What's the problem? You don't have a ceiling, but your oven still works. But what do? We gave her a $200 DoorDash gift card. And then when the work was done, we noticed when we were doing the walkthrough, some drywall debris had gotten in her toaster oven. So our construction manager, nobody had to tell him, he literally went to Target and bought her a brand new toaster. It was like $35. The woman was so over the top excited. She personally called into our corporate offices to talk to Georgia just to say what a great job we did. So somebody took that time and effort to track us down and to call us personally, right? For $235, right? And that person gave us a 5-star review on Google, which will have an exponential effect on future residents, right? So that PM is so important. And when I say the PM, yes, there's a property manager, there's a leasing manager, there's a maintenance tech, there's a construction team. They all have to honor our values. So we go out and hire those people. So as you said, some of these roles at this point, as we kind of go to these next few, these could be potentially third party, right? They may not always be employees of your company, right? And so you mentioned it, like we do think we'll bring property management in-house one day, but there are things you have to consider. It's a heavy company in terms of employees and software and expense. And so, it's going to be a business decision we make, not an emotional decision. Like it sounds great, but it better make a lot of sense,
Yeah.
because we don't want to do anything that jeopardizes us.
Right on. So we're gonna wrap this up. There's a couple other key hires here that you want to bring on, and this is not in-house, but for us, because we're cross-border, we have a lot of Canadians investing in our deals. We have a cross-border accounting firm, and so we also have securities lawyer and attorney on both sides of the border. So to ensure that we're compliant with the Ontario Securities Commission on the Canadian side. And so the Securities Commission is actually right across provincially as well. But our securities lawyer looks after all of our Canadian securities to make sure that all of our legal docs, our PPM and our subscription agreement are all in alignment. And then on the American side, we have a separate securities lawyer on the American side as well. So those are 2 key players. And then we also have a cross-border accounting firm as well that do all the billionaire accounting. they have many billionaires that they oversee as well. So we ensure that we get the best and that our investors on both sides of the border maximize their tax advantages as well. So those are the key players there overall. And hopefully moving forward, you have not only a better understanding if you do want to scale and grow your own portfolio and build a real estate investment firm yourself, but also to have a better understanding of how we do it so that, when you're coming in any of our deals, knowing that we have all the bases covered and we have the right players in the right spots, it becomes really, really important. So moving forward, if you guys are looking to find out more about our next deal, go to fulloutinvesting.com. And by doing that, you're going to be able to get access to our 10-step full out investing process. And you're also going to get access to a sample deal as well. There's a landing page, go to fulloutinvesting.com, and you're going to have all the details there. So thanks for listening, guys. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and share with other high net worth investors that you think will benefit from it. Thanks for tuning in to the Multifamily Investor Playbook. We love and believe in you guys. Keep dreaming and investing big.